Hello, everyone. My name is Cassandra Jones, and my title for my paper is Finding Infinity Through the Eyes of Yayoi Kusama. In 2017, I heard of a room with thousands of lights. Pictures of this room started to flood the media, and every time I saw these pictures, I wanted to see this room of light even more. In July of 2018, I was finally able to see this room and learn of its name, The Souls of a Million Light Years Away by Yayoi Kusama. As I stood in line to see the exhibit, I was more anxious. My boyfriend and I were informed that we only have 45 seconds in the room. When it was our turn, we walked in. And what we walked into was everything that we expected. We felt like we were in another universe and could not help but be like the people on social media and document our visit. After the picture, we only had 15 seconds left. I looked for those 15 seconds and could not feel but uneasy at the end. A week later, I made another visit to this exhibit. This time, I did not document, but sat down on the ramp and actually looked up at this piece. Around me, there was darkness. The lights flickered, and you were lost in another dimension. And this time, I felt alone. After researching and learning about the artist, I realized that this work was more than just beautiful lights. It was a testimony of Kusama and how this room was her lifeline. In my paper, I will explore Yayoi Kusama and how her struggles in her life led upon the creation of the souls of a million light years away. Questions I will explore is, did Kusama create works so she can escape? Is this her spirituality and her way of coping with her demons? The souls of a million light years away shows beauty of light and the fear of darkness. Is this room an act of light that Kusama is trying to find? Through my paper, I will explore the life of Kusama and how her art would not be successful if it wasn't for her struggles. Born in 1929 in Matsumoto, Japan, Yayoi Kusama was the youngest of 4 children. She was born into a wealthy but dysfunctional family. Kusama's family was of high social standing, having for the past century managed a wholesale seed nurseries. Kusama's parents were the products of a loveless arranged marriage. Her father adopted the Kusama family name, and he was seen as powerless in the family, which led to his affairs. She recollects in her autobiography that her upbringing was very traumatic and miserable, as her mother would vent all her rage onto her. She remembers her mother sending her to spy on her father and his mistress. She would witness her father frequent visits to the house of prostitution, geisha quarters, and even seducing her housemaids. Despite her toxic family, Kusama always turned to art. However, her mother was not happy with her daughter drawing. Her mother would sneak up on Kusama and take her pictures out of her hand. That sense of hysteria and panic informs Kusama's own process of work today. Maybe in Kusama's mind, she feels if she finishes her work fast enough, it will not be torn away from her. Her unhappy childhood resulted in a series of disturbing hallucinations. Her first hallucination happened when she was a young girl sitting among the bed of violets near her family farm. She claims that she would get lost in them, and then one day the violets started to talk to her. Her next hallucination happened when she gazed at the flower pattern on a tablecloth in her house. In her autobiography, she explained, "One day I was looking at a red pattern of a tablecloth on a table, and when I looked up, I saw the same pattern covering the ceiling, the windows, the walls, and finally all over the room, my body, and the universe." She recalled, "I felt as if I had begun to self-obliterate, to resolve in the infinity of endless time and the absoluteness of space. It was not an illusion, but reality itself." In the 1950s, Kusama had her first solo exhibit in Japan, but no one recognized her talent. At that time, Japan was a very conservative country and male-dominated society. However, growing up, Kusama never gave up on her art. She greatly admired an artist, Georgia O'Keeffe, and even wrote to her asking her for advice. Advice that Kusama asked was, "Will you kindly show me the way to become an artist?" Georgia O'Keeffe would write back, telling Kusama and warning her that America is a country that an artist has a hard time of making a living. Nevertheless, she advised Kusama to come to America and show her work to as many people as she could. In her mid-20s, Kusama did just that. Reacting against what she regarded as her parents' old-fashioned custom and morals, she decided to seek freedom and fame abroad. She moved to New York in 1958. She claims that America was really the country that raised her. As a young artist who left Japan for New York, she knew no one. As a single Japanese woman with almost no connection, she repeatedly faced sexism, racism, and lack of opportunity. Kusama describes her work as art medicine. Her work, The Infinity Nuts, which first won her critical acclaim in New York, originate from visual hallucinations that she claims have haunted her since childhood. She first referenced the hallucinatory episodes as early as 1963 in an interview with art critic Gordon Brown for WABC Radio. She says, "My nets grew beyond myself and beyond the canvases I was covering with them. They began to cover the walls, the ceilings, and finally, the universe." Kusama says that polka dots are a way to infinity, which is why she calls her polka-dotted infinity nuts. She was praised for her paintings, especially by art critic Donald Judd. Her next major work were her penis chairs. She claims that she was afraid of sex. This could be because of what she saw in her childhood from her adulterous father. In the early 60s, Kusama began to see a psychiatrist in New York at the suggestion of a galleryist. And though the artist continued to suffer from her mental illness, her artwork became a way to channel her obsessive-compulsive neurosis. Around this time, the artist began creating hundreds, if not thousands, of soft sculptures, phallic protrusions that covered the surfaces of furniture, objects, floors, and walls. She called this accumulation. These accumulations was a result of her obsessions. Again, here an example of how her trauma from her childhood became a subject of her work. In June of 1962, Kusama was included in a group show that involved some of the day's most avant-garde artists: Claes Oldenburg, James Razenkest, George Segal, and Andy Warhol. The exhibit at the Green Gallery in New York was considered the first pop show in the United States. Kusama exhibited her accumulation number 1, which was an armchair covered in white sewn and stuffed protrusions. Not only was Kusama the only woman, she was also likely the least known. Claes Oldenburg had exhibited a papier-mâché sculpture in the exhibition. At the same time, he had been working primarily with papier-mâché and non-traditional but hard sculptural materials. Just months after Kusama exhibited accumulation number 1 at the Green Gallery, Oldenburg mounted a solo show at the same gallery. The exhibition was filled with soft sculptures. Regardless of Oldenburg's intentions, his actions caused Kusama to become deeply depressed. Still discouraged by the lack of recognition she received for innovating a new kind of sculpture, Kusama would often lock herself in her studio without coming out for days, as Oldenburg became an international sensation. Kusama's first solo exhibition came in December 1964. This exhibition was called Aggregation, 1000 Boat Show at the Gertrude Stein Gallery. At the gallery, Kusama presented a rowboat, which was treated similarly to the chairpiece she showed months before, covered with sewn and stuffed phallic protrusions. Kusama took a picture of the boat and reproduced it 1,000 times, and then papering the floors, walls, and ceilings of the gallery, which tiled the image. Andy Warhol visited Kusama's show and was very impressed. Kusama considered Warhol a good friend, but later she accused him of stealing her ideas. This is because in 1966, Warhol had his own show, repeating vibrant screen prints of a cow on the walls of the gallery and again in later shows. Continuing to push her self-obliteration installations, Kusama created her first mirror room in 1965, called Peep Show or Endless Love Show. The room was filled with sewn and stuffed polka dot protrusions, which covered the entire floor. The walls were covered in mirrors, which reflected her and the polka dot protrusions. The effect was seamlessly endless expanse of polka dotted fields. 7 months later, an artist named Lucas Samaras would show a mirrored environment at the far more established Pace Gallery. Though the artist had dabbled in making objects using mirrored glass, he had never before made an environment. Instead, the artist was known primarily for small sculptural boxes. Looking at Samaras' mirrored room, there is no mistaking its similarity to Kusama's mirrored room that preceded it. Kusama became depressed after seeing Samaras' room, that she became suicidal. Kusama was taken advantage of not only by male artists who ripped off her work, but also by the dealers, gallerists, curators, collectors who favored showing and supporting white male artists in the 60s. Kusama released Happening in 1965. Since 1967, she had a lot of happenings and fashion shows not only in New York, but also in Holland and Rome. As she got more active, she was influenced by anti-Vietnam War movement and the American presidential election and social elements that were added to her work. As she became known internationally, the attention spread to Japan, where Kusama wasn't highly talked about. Her family started to be looked down upon, and they started to believe in the bad media about their daughter. Kusama decided to visit Japan, and at that point, she learned of how much of a disgrace she was. Slowly, her health started to disintegrate. This was triggered from the death of her father, to being rejected as an artist in Japan, and from her family. Back in Japan, her vision started to flicker, and she began to have hallucinations. She ended up staying in Tokyo, and in 1975, she entered a hospital in Shinjuku. Kusama claims because of the trauma from her childhood, she became depressed and could no longer paint. At the hospital, she started to find art again, and then she slowly started to paint again. However, being in the Japanese art world, she had to start over again as an artist. Over the course of the late 70s and 80s, Kusama started to be forgotten in New York. For Kusama's lost years, art was the biggest form of therapy and a large force into the artist's reprisal, which started with her key show at Tokyo Fuji Gallery in 1982. Kusama's Fuji show, Obsession, was the first show in Japan to exhibit her paintings and sculptures. Hearing about the show, curator Alexandra Monroe flew over to Tokyo, and after attending the exhibit, she knew she had to display Kusama's work in New York again, and she made it her mission. A spark was suddenly lit in Kusama's work. In 1989, Monroe visited Kusama and collected old pictures, publicities, and paintings to take back to her to New York. In that same year, Yayoi Kusama, a retrospective, signified a major reveal of American and European interest in the artist's work, and it was the first time she had been shown in the U.S. for over 16 years. Paralleling this reveal was a revelation of her work in Japan, and in the same year, Kusama became the first ever Japanese artist to grace the cover of Art in America. In 1993, Kusama was invited to exhibit her work at the 45th Venice Biennale in Italy, making her the first Japanese woman to ever show at the esteemed event. Traditionally, Japanese artists would show in groups of 2 or 3, but in honor of Kusama's strong personality and talent, she was given a solo show, also making her the first Japanese artist in the history of the biennales to exhibit alone. Despite her resurgence in the Western world and being chosen to represent her country at the Biennale, back home in Japan, Kusama was still largely resisted. This was until Matsumoto City Art Gallery was built. Again, Matsumoto City was her hometown, which was very significant to Kusama. And in 2002, the space held a Kusama retrospective, which united over 280 of the artist's work. And from there, floods of Matsumoto residents came to visit. This not only sparked important Japanese interest in Kusama, but it also cemented Kusama's position as one of the Japanese art history's most important revolutionaries. At this point of her life, she felt being a painter and being an international sensation completed her goal because she was now known as an artist in Japan. Looking back at her struggles and back at the souls a million light years away, Kusama went through a lot in her life to get to the place where she's at today. However, if Kusama did not have those struggles and had a good childhood, her outcome of an artist could be different today. Maybe she would not have been a known artist, and maybe she would have never created the Infinity Rooms. Because if she had a good childhood and a good life, she would not have had her compulsive neurosis disorder. She would not see hallucinations, and she would not be in a mental institution. However, if none of this had happened, her artwork wouldn't be such a sensation as it is today. Her artwork wouldn't be what it is. Her hallucinations is based on her art. And because of that, Kusama's life led her to where she was supposed to be. Despite her struggles, art became her savior. And the Finney Room is an example of her hallucinations. The room itself takes you to an illusion. You are seeing millions of lights around you, and then when you look at the mirror, you are covered in them. This particular room consists of small LED lights hung from the ceiling and flicker in a rhythmic pattern. The lights reflect off the mirror in the intimate room, creating the illusion of an endless space. Only one or two visitors at a time can experience the installation, and his or her body activates the environment once in the room. This meditative space is a reflection on life and the inevitability of death. Kusama explains that her work does battle at the boundary between life and death, questioning what we are and what it means to live and die. By encouraging visitors to contemplate their experience, Kusama's work emphasizes the interconnectedness we have to each other and to the universe. By using light, their reflection, and so on, she wanted to show the cosmic image beyond the world where we live. Above all, Kusama's failures show us the brave struggle she had to endure to reach the success she has today. Despite her childhood, the male-dominant society, and her mental disorder, Kusama became an international sensation of the 21st century. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation.